Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Racist landlords threatened a black woman in her residence, but bitterly regretted it. Aisha Johnson, a 32-year-old black woman, had just landed a promising digital marketing position at a major Chicago company. This new job represented more than just a career change. It was the culmination of years of sacrifice, study, and side jobs to finance her dream. After months of searching, she had finally saved enough to rent a beautiful apartment in a well-known residential neighborhood, Lakeview Heights, a quiet, leafy place where she hoped to start a new life. The neighborhood had a peaceful atmosphere, with streets lined with century-old trees, immaculately maintained houses, and neighbors who tended their gardens as if they were cultivating a treasure. He had heard praise for the neighborhood's quality of life and safety, which contrasted with his previous home in the city center, where noise and bustle were constant. On the day she moved in, the autumn sun bathed the streets in a soft light. She wore a broad smile, her boxes loaded in her arms, eager to cross the threshold of her new home. That's when she passed Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, the building's owners. Both were older, elegantly dressed, with a rigid posture that commanded respect. Mrs. Whitmore wore a simple suit, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Mr. Whitmore wore a conservative suit, and their cold gazes fixed on her with an intensity that suddenly made Aisha's smile fall. Their reputation in the neighborhood was well known. They were strict about the rules, but more importantly, their neighbors whispered quietly that they were intolerant, sometimes even openly racist. Aisha felt this weight on her shoulders from the first glance. A foreigner in this haven of peace? This was not the image they had of their ideal residence. The first few days passed without any major incident, but a dull unease was setting in. At first, Aisha convinced herself it was her imagination or the natural nervousness of any new move. Yet, quickly, the small signs accumulated. One afternoon, while walking her dog, Bailey, an affectionate Labrador, she ran into Mr. Whitmore in the yard. Without warning, he called out to her, his voice icy. "Your dog barks too loudly. Some people here appreciate the quiet, so you should take that into account." Aisha apologized, explaining that Bailey had just arrived and it would be sorted soon. But this rebuke seemed less about the noise than about her. For her part, Mrs. Whitmore played a more insidious role. Electricity and water bills were often late, putting her in awkward situations, as if someone was trying to unsettle her. And if a noise lasted more than 10 seconds, a burst of laughter, a neighbor passing by, she would receive a complaint, whereas other tenants could party without a word ever being made. One evening at the annual meeting of the condominium owners, as Aisha hoped to build rapport and show goodwill, Mrs. Whitmore said something that felt like a stab. "Some people don't really know how to behave in a neighborhood like ours." The voice was low, almost a whisper, but clear enough for everyone present to hear. Eyes turned to Aisha, who felt a mixture of shame, anger, and sadness wash over her. It was a targeted attack, a clear message that her presence was unsettling. That sentence echoed in her mind for a long time. She knew she wasn't the only one experiencing these microaggressions, but that didn't make the pain any less. For the first time, the dream of a peaceful home wavered, shaken by the reality of the subtle, yet powerful racism that permeated this place. One autumn evening, as the sky darkened rapidly and the streets of Lakeview Heights gradually emptied, Aisha was returning home late from work. She had spent a long day managing a complex project, and fatigue was evident in her slightly heavy steps. Dusk cast an orange light on the facades of the houses, but a darker shadow awaited her outside her building. Mr. Whitmore stood there, leaning against the front gate, arms crossed, a hard expression on his face. As soon as Aisha stepped onto the sidewalk, he walked toward her with measured steps, his gaze sharp and cold. "Miss Johnson," he began, his voice low but sharp, almost glacial, "you'd better think about your place here. We don't like trouble. It would be in your best interest to leave before things get worse." The tone admitted no dispute, no discussion. It was a threat disguised as advice, a cruel warning that echoed in the evening silence. Aisha's heart sank, a bitter mixture of fear, anger, and sadness filling her. It wasn't just a warning. It was a clear and merciless statement. Here, in this neighborhood she had chosen for its serenity, She was not welcome. She was an intruder, a target. Yet, deep within her, a flame still burned. Aisha was not one to be intimidated, much less to run away from injustice. This moment, as painful as it was, would become the trigger for a greater struggle. The next morning, she contacted a local organization, Justice and Equality, an advocacy group that helps victims of racial discrimination assert their rights. At their first meeting, Aisha detailed all the microaggressions, hostile behavior, and the explicit threat she had received. The Justice and Equality team proposed a plan: document each incident, gather testimonies from neighbors, discreetly record the owner's comments when possible, and collect all tangible evidence. Aisha threw herself into this meticulous work with determination. She noted every detail, every hurtful word, and mustered the courage to speak with some neighbors, who sometimes proved more supportive than she had expected. As the weeks passed, the case thickened. Finally, with the help of the association, a formal complaint was filed with the relevant court for racial discrimination and harassment. The trial was a pivotal moment. The courtroom, solemn and cold, was filled with tense faces. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, standing behind their lawyers, played the respectable citizen's card, denying any form of racism and claiming that the accusations were unfounded, even exaggerated. But faced with Aisha's unwavering determination and the overwhelming evidence, witness accounts, recordings, documents, the Whitmores' facade began to crack. Every attempt to downplay their actions was thwarted by concrete evidence, delivered calmly and precisely. The judge, after listening to both sides at length, delivered his verdict gravely. The Whitmores were found guilty of racial discrimination and harassment. Not only did the court order significant financial compensation for Aisha, but it also imposed a powerful symbolic measure. The Whitmores were required to undergo mandatory training on racism and diversity in the hope of correcting their prejudices. Finally, they were ordered to publicly apologize to the entire neighborhood community, an act of public humiliation for people who had believed themselves untouchable. For Aisha, this victory was more than a personal triumph. It was a signal to the entire community, a reminder that intolerance would not go unpunished. She had stood firm, refused to be crushed, and made her voice heard where many would have chosen silence. News of the trial and Aisha's victory spread quickly throughout Lakeview Heights, like a ripple breaking the calm surface of a lake. At first, many neighbors preferred to look the other way. Some quietly shared the Whitmores' prejudices, others simply feared conflict, preferring indifference to courage. But as the facts became known, this indifference turned to awareness. In cafes, on sidewalks, and in building lobbies, the conversations were changing. People now spoke of Aisha's strength, the young woman who had refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. They also discussed the need to move beyond old grudges and look beyond appearances and prejudices. Little by little, Aisha became a respected voice, a symbol of change and unity in this neighborhood long frozen by habits and silences. Neighbors began to approach her, tentatively at first, then sincerely. Some sought advice to better understand their own behavior, while others expressed a desire to participate in community initiatives to strengthen community life. Aisha, aware of the weight of this new responsibility, engaged wholeheartedly in these discussions, ready to build a bridge between the different components of the neighborhood. A few weeks later, at the condominium's annual meeting, an unusual event took place. It was the first time Mrs. Whitmore had spoken in public since the trial. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. In a trembling but honest voice, she declared, "I deeply regret my actions and the hurtful words I said. This trial has opened my eyes to my own prejudices I never wanted to see. I hope to be able to repair, at least in part, the harm I caused to Aisha, but also to our entire community." The moment was heavy with symbolism. Mrs. Whitmore's words, spoken with humility, were not enough to erase the wounds, but they marked a crucial turning point. The room applauded, not out of obligation, but because they felt the authenticity of these regrets. Aisha, sitting in the front row, smiled softly. This smile was not just that of a personal victory, but of a collective victory, of possible change. She knew that this stage was far from the end, but she had just broken through a barrier that had long been invisible and silent. The Whitmores, previously rigid and uncompromising figures, seemed transformed. Their public humiliation had forced them to rethink their behavior, to embrace what many in the neighborhood were already calling a new era. They publicly committed to attending diversity training, supporting local anti-racism initiatives, and adopting a stance of respect and listening. For Aisha, this development finally meant peace in her home. She could walk the streets of Lakeview Heights without fear of stares or hasty judgment. She had stood firm in the face of adversity, proving that courage and perseverance could shatter the walls of racism. And as the autumn leaves gently fell onto the sidewalks, Lakeview Heights seemed ready to turn a page, with the hope of a fairer, more humane, and more united future.